The first sensation that pierced through Ethan Cole's unconsciousness wasn't pain, though his body certainly had reason for it, but warmth. A gentle, almost ethereal warmth that seemed to emanate from somewhere above him, drawing him up from the dark depths of oblivion like a lifeline cast. Into still waters his eyelids felt impossibly heavy as he fought to open them, the effort requiring more strength than he remembered possessing. When he finally managed to crack them apart, the world that greeted him was nothing like the sterile white medical bay of his exploration vessel. The meridian instead, soft amber light, bathed everything in golden hues, emanating from crystalline formations that grew along curved walls of what appeared to be living stone. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His vision focused on the figure leaning over him. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, distinctly humanoid in shape, but with skin that possessed an inner luminescence like moonlight caught beneath the surface of still water. Her features were delicate yet alien, with larger eyes that held depths of intelligence and something else he couldn't quite identify. Her hair, if it could be called that, seemed to move with its own subtle current, shifting between shades of silver and blue. Panic should have gripped him. Every instinct screamed that he should be afraid, should be fighting or fleeing from this unknown being. Instead, as their eyes met, he felt an overwhelming sense of rightness, as if this moment had been inevitable, written in the stars themselves. The alien woman, for he instinctively knew she was female, studied his face with an intensity that should have been unsettling. Her lips moved, forming sounds that were musical but incomprehensible. When he didn't respond, she tilted her head and he caught a glimpse of what might have been sadness in those luminous eyes. Then, without warning, she leaned closer and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. It wasn't passionate or demanding, but reverent, almost sacred. The moment their lips touched, something extraordinary happened. Colors exploded behind his closed eyelids. Not the harsh, jarring flashes of a damaged brain, but gentle waves of emotion made visible. He could feel her feelings washing over him: relief, joy, and beneath it all a profound sense of connection that defied explanation. When she pulled away, Ethan found that he could breathe more easily, that the persistent ache in his chest had diminished. More than that, he could sense her presence in his mind, not invasive or frightening, but comforting. Like finding an old friend in a crowd of strangers. Who are you?" he managed to whisper, his voice from disuse. She smiled then, and the expression transformed her already beautiful features into something radiant again. She spoke in her musical language, but this time somehow he could almost understand the meaning behind the sounds, if not the words themselves. "Kira," came a whisper, in his mind so gentle he might have imagined it. "My designation is Kira." Ethan struggled to sit up, and she immediately moved to support him, her touch sending small waves of healing warmth through his body. He realized then that he was lying on something that felt like a living surface, soft and responsive to his movements. The entire chamber seemed organic, grown rather than built. "Where am I?" he asked, looking around at the bioluminescent walls and crystalline formations. Kira's response came partly in her musical language and partly through the strange connection they now shared. He understood that his ship had crashed on her world, or rather, the moon where her people had established an outpost. She had found him among the wreckage, more dead than alive, and had brought him here to heal the others. Ethan asked, urgently remembering his 3-person crew. The sadness that crossed Kira's features told him everything he needed to know through their link. He felt her memories of finding the crash, sight of searching desperately through the twisted metal for any signs of life. He had been the only survivor, and barely. That grief threatened to overwhelm him. But Kira's presence in his mind served as an anchor, her empathy absorbing some of his pain and transforming it into something bearable. She understood. Loss, he realized her people were few and every life was precious. As the hours passed, or what he assumed were hours in this place where time seemed fluid, Kira tended to him with a gentleness that spoke of deep caring. She brought him water that tasted of minerals and starlight, and food that nourished him in ways that went beyond the physical. Each time she touched him, whether to check his wounds or simply to offer comfort, he felt stronger, more whole. But it was more than healing taking place between them. With each shared glance, each moment of contact, the bond that had formed with that first kiss grew stronger. Ethan found himself able to sense her emotions more clearly, to understand her intentions even when language failed them. And slowly he began to realize that what he was feeling wasn't just gratitude or the disorientation of trauma. It was something far more profound and potentially dangerous. The first stirrings of love for a being from another world in a place where such feelings might cost them both everything they had ever known. As Kira settled beside him for what passed for night in this strange place, her luminescent skin providing a gentle nightlight in the amber-lit chamber, Ethan found himself facing a question that would change everything. What did you do when your heart chose someone the universe said you couldn't have? 3 days had passed since Ethan's awakening, and with each sunrise that filtered through the crystalline walls of Kira's sanctuary, their connection deepened in ways that defied his scientific understanding. The healing chamber had become a world unto itself, a place where two vastly different beings learned to communicate through touch emotion and the growing psychic bond that pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. Ethan's physical recovery had been remarkable. The deep gashes from twisted metal had sealed themselves under Kira's care, leaving only faint silver lines across his chest and arms. But it was the emotional healing that truly amazed him. The crushing grief over his lost crewmates Jenkins, his co-pilot Torres, their xenobiologist, and Kai, barely out of the academy, remained. But it no longer threatened to drown him. Through their bond, Kira had helped him transform that pain into something he could carry, a memorial, rather than a burden. Your people, Ethan said one morning as Kira brought him the mineral-rich water that had become as essential to him as air. Tell me about them. Kira settled beside him on the living surface that served as his bed, her legs folding gracefully beneath her when she spoke. It was in her musical language, but now the words came accompanied by images and emotions that painted a clearer picture than any translation could have provided. The Vidians, as she called her species, were an ancient people who had learned long ago that emotional connections were not just bonds between individuals, but pathways to understanding. The very fabric of existence, their society was built on empathy, on the ability to truly feel what another felt. It made them powerful healers, intuitive scientists, and profound artists. But it also made them vulnerable through their link. Ethan experienced fragments of Vidian history, the devastating war with a species that had exploited their empathic nature, using it as a weapon against them. The exodus from their homeworld, the careful isolation they had maintained ever since, fearful of forming bonds that could be turned against them again. That's why you're here alone. Ethan realized the understanding flowing between them like water, finding its level. You're not supposed to be making contact with outsiders. Kira's response came tinged with rebellious determination. She was a healer, one of the most gifted of her generation, but she was also curious about the universe beyond their carefully maintained boundaries. This outpost was her compromise with the Council, a place where she could pursue her research into emotional resonance while remaining safely distant from potentially dangerous alien influences. Then she had found him. The bond we share, Ethan said, reaching out to touch her luminescent cheek, marveling at how her skin seemed to respond to his presence with brighter patterns of light. It's not normal for your people, is it? The complexity of her answer unfolded in his mind like a flower blooming fast forward. Vidian bonds typically formed slowly over cycles of careful courtship and emotional exploration. What had happened between them? The instant profound connection forged in a moment of desperate healing was unprecedented. It suggested a compatibility that transcended species resonance that her people's science couldn't fully explain. And it terrified them, as if summoned by their conversation. A new presence made itself known at the chamber's entrance. Ethan looked up to see another Vidian, this one older, with skin that held the deep blue silver of age starlight. The newcomer's bearing spoke of authority, and the concern radiating from them was palpable even to Ethan's newly awakened empathic senses. Kira rose quickly, her body language shifting to something more formal, more defensive. The older Vidian spoke in rapid, urgent tones, their words accompanied by emotional undercurrents that Ethan could sense but not fully interpret. What he could understand was the fear not of him personally, but of what his presence represented. Elder thing, Kira said. And through their bond, Ethan understood this was her mentor, the one who had sponsored her research and vouched for her unconventional placement at this remote outpost. The conversation between mentor and student played out in both verbal and empathic dimensions, a complex dance of motion and meaning that left Ethan feeling like an observer at a symphony, played in frequencies he could barely hear. But certain themes emerged clearly concerned for Kira's safety questions about the unprecedented nature of their bond, and beneath it all a growing alarm about what the council might do if they discovered what had transpired. Elder Thane's gaze finally turned to Ethan, and for a moment, he felt the full weight of ancient wisdom and carefully controlled fear. The elder's empathic touch was different from Kira's more clinical, more analytical as they examined the bond that connected human and Vidian. What they found there made them step back in genuine shock. The elders spoke again, this time directing their words to both Kira and Ethan, their meaning clear even across the species barrier. This should not be possible that evening as Elder Thane departed with promises to consider their situation carefully. Ethan and Kira found themselves alone again, in the healing chamber, but the sanctuary no longer felt as safe as it had before the outside world had intruded, bringing with it the weight of politics, prejudice, and the kind of fear that could destroy something beautiful before it had a chance to fully bloom. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, as they lay together on the living surface, her head resting against his shoulder, her skin painting gentle patterns of light across the chamber walls. Kira's response came not in words, but in images and emotions. Council chambers where serious-faced Vidians debated the fate of contaminated bloodlines. Quarantine facilities where those who had formed inappropriate bonds were kept in isolation, and beneath it all the deep abiding fear of another exploitation, another betrayal that could shatter their carefully rebuilt civilization. But there were other images too. Quiet moments stolen between heartbeats. The joy of perfect understanding. The possibility of love that transcended the boundaries their peoples had built around themselves, and underlying everything a fierce determination that burned as bright as her luminescent skin. "We have time," she whispered in his mind, her arms tightening around him. "Not much, but some. Help me make it count." As they held each other in the amber light of the living chamber, feeling their two hearts beating in an impossible synchrony, Ethan realized that he would do whatever it took to protect what they had found together, even if it meant challenging the fears and prejudices of two entire species, even if it meant choosing love over the safety of the known world. 7 days into Ethan's recovery, the healing chamber had transformed into something neither medical facility nor prison but a sanctuary, where two souls explored the boundaries of what was possible between species. The physical intimacy between them had grown naturally from their empathic bond, each touch revealing new depths of connection that defied every scientific principle Ethan had ever learned. It began with simple gestures. Kira's fingers tracing the silver scars across his chest, her touch not just healing, but celebrating the marks that proved a survival. Ethan learned that Vidians experienced physical sensation differently than humans. For them, touch was a language as complex as any spoken word, capable of conveying emotions, memories, and intentions with startling clarity. "Show me," Ethan whispered one evening as they lay together, the chamber's bioluminescent walls pulsing in rhythm with their shared heartbeat. "Show me how your people love." What followed was a revelation that transcended the physical when Kira's lips met his. This time it wasn't the desperate healing kiss of their first encounter, but something far more profound through their bond. He felt her love for him not as words or even emotions, but as pure experience. Warm sunlight on skin, the sound of laughter echoing through crystal caves, the comfort of coming home after a long journey. Their lovemaking was unlike anything from his human experience. Each caress carried emotional resonance. Every kiss deepened their psychic connection. When Kira's luminescent skin pressed against his, the patterns of light that danced across her body told stories of joy, desire, and a love so pure it made his heart ache through their bond. He could feel her pleasure as clearly as his own, creating a feedback loop of sensation and emotion that left them both gasping and transformed. But it was more than physical. As they moved together in the amber light, Ethan began to understand the true nature of Vidian bonding. It wasn't just the joining of bodies, but the literal interweaving of souls with each moment of intimate connection. Their minds touched more deeply, their memories beginning to blur and merge. He saw fragments of her childhood on distant Vidian colonies, felt her wonder the first time she had successfully healed another being's wounds. In turn, she experienced his memories of Earth, blue skies, and ocean waves, the sound of rain on metal, the bittersweet ache of leaving everything familiar behind to explore the stars. Is this what bonding truly means? He asked as they lay entwined afterward, her head on his chest, her skin still glowing with the after-effects of their connection. Her response came as understanding rather than word-strew. Bonding among Vidians was rare, sacred, a complete merging of two beings into something greater than the sum of their parts. It typically took cycles to achieve, if it happened at all. What they'd accomplished in mere days was unprecedented, impossible, and absolutely forbidden for her people to attempt. With an outsider, the danger of their situation became devastatingly clear. 3 days later, when Elder Thien returned, but not alone. 3 council members accompanied the elder, their expressions grave, and their emotional signatures tightly controlled. Ethan felt Kira's fear spike as they entered the chamber, her hand finding his. Instinctively, the lead counselor, an imposing figure whose skin held the deep purple hues of extreme age, spoke in the formal cadences of official judgment. Through the bond, Ethan understood the gist of their pronouncement. The council had been monitoring the situation through Elder Thane's reports, and what they had discovered violated the most fundamental laws of Vidian society. Interspecies bonding was not just forbidden, it was considered a form of contamination that could threaten the purity of their empathic abilities. There had been cases in their distant past where such bonds had created instabilities in the psychic network that connected all Vidians, causing widespread emotional chaos and, in the worst instances, madness. But our bond is stable, Kira protested, rising to face the council with a dignity that made Ethan's heart swell with pride. It brings clarity, not chaos, healing, not harm. The counselor's response was swift and final. The bond was an aberration that must be severed immediately. Kira would be returned to the homeworld for purification treatments, while the human would be placed in isolation until his own people could retrieve him. Any attempt to maintain or strengthen their connection would result in permanent exile for Kira, and mind-wiping for Ethan. Mind-wiping. Ethan stood despite his still healing injuries, anger flaring through their bond. You can't just erase someone's memories because they don't fit your prejudices. The counselor's gaze turned to him with something approaching pity. Through Elder Thane's translation, he learned that Vidian empathic abilities, when properly focused, could indeed alter or remove memories. It was considered a mercy, a way to spare him the pain of remembering a love that could never be. No. Kira said, her voice ringing with a determination that surprised even the council members. I will not allow this. What happened next was something none of them had anticipated. Kira reached for Ethan's hand, and the moment their fingers touched, their bond flared with such intensity that every Vidian in the chamber staggered backward. The emotional resonance between them had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible, creating a feedback loop that briefly overwhelmed even the council's carefully maintained mental shields. In that moment of psychic chaos, Ethan saw the truth that the council feared. He and Kira weren't just bonded. They were evolving into something new. A hybrid consciousness that bridged the gap between their species. Their love wasn't contamination. It was transformation. But the council saw only danger as they regained their composure. The lead counselor's expression hardened with resolve. The separation will happen at dawn, he declared. Ready yourself for transport. Healer Kira, your time with the alien ends now. As the council departed, leaving only Elder Thien behind with eyes full of regret and sorrow, Ethan and Kira clung to each other in the face of an impossible situation. They had one night left, one final chance to explore the love that had bloomed so impossibly between them. Whatever happens, Ethan whispered against her luminescent skin as they made love with desperate tenderness, I will find a way back to you. Her response echoed in his mind as their bodies and souls merged one last time. Even if it takes 1,000 lifetimes, I will wait for you. But even as they promised each other eternity, both knew that dawn would bring a choice that could destroy them both, or transform them into something the universe had never seen. Before the night before their forced separation, Ethan and Kira didn't sleep. Instead, they held each other in the gentle amber glow of the healing chamber. Their bodies intertwined, their minds sharing every memory, every dream, every whispered hope for a future that seemed increasingly impossible as dawn approached. They could sense the preparation outside their sanctuary. Vidian ships hummed with barely audible energy signatures, their crews preparing for two very different journeys, one that would take Kira home for purification, and another that would place Ethan in quarantine until human authorities could retrieve him. There has to be another way. Ethan set his fingers tracing the luminescent patterns that danced across Kira's skin in response. To her emotional state, even now facing separation, she was beautiful to him, not just physically but in every fiber of her being. Kira's response came through their bond complex and layered with possibility, through her connection to the Vidian empathic network. She had sensed something the Council either couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. Their bond wasn't an aberration, but an evolution. Other Vidians, especially the younger generations, were curious about the universe beyond their carefully maintained boundaries. Some even envied the depth of connection she had achieved with him. "If we run," she said aloud, her musical voice carrying undertones of desperation and hope, "where would we go? Neither of our peoples would accept us." The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Ethan had been thinking about this very problem for days, ever since Elder Thane's first visit had made their situation clear. His ship's navigation computer had survived the crash, and buried in its memory banks were charts of unexplored systems, worlds that existed in the spaces between established territories. "We could find our own place," he said, "somewhere new where we could be what we are without having to hide or apologize for it." The idea terrified and thrilled them both, to leave everything familiar behind, to become voluntary exiles in pursuit of a love that neither of their species understood. It seemed both impossibly romantic and utterly insane. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Elder Thane, who entered the chamber with an expression of profound conflict. Through careful mental shielding, the Elder had hidden their true purpose from the Council. But now that deception was about to serve a greater cause. "I have been thinking," they said, their words heavy with the weight of a decision that could cost them everything, "about what I observed when your bond flared yesterday. The resonance between you. It wasn't chaotic, as the Council claims. It was harmonious, perfectly balanced. In all my years studying empathic connections, I have never seen anything like it." Hope flared in Kira's chest, bright enough that Ethan could feel it through their bond. "You believe us?" she said. "I believe," Thane replied slowly, "that the Council's fear has blinded them to an extraordinary opportunity. Your bond could be the key to understanding how our species might safely interact with others, but they will never allow such research to proceed." The Elder's next words changed everything. "There is a ship in the outer dock, a small research vessel that I have been authorized to use for extended studies. Its destination logs could easily be misplaced, and human rescue teams are not expected for several more days." The offer hung in the air between them, freedom, but at the cost of making Elder Thane complicit in their escape. Kira reached for her mentor's hand, her empathic abilities reading the complex mix of motions that drove this unprecedented offer. Scientific curiosity, genuine affection for her, and beneath it all, a growing belief that love might be more important than law. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Why would you risk everything for us?" Thane's answer came with the weight of lived experience. "Because I once loved someone the Council deemed inappropriate. A Vidian from a different caste, when such distinction still mattered to our people. I chose obedience over love, and I have regretted it every day since. I will not watch another make the same mistake." The decision crystallized in that moment as the first light of dawn began to filter through the crystalline walls. Ethan and Kira made their choice. They would run not in defeat, but in pursuit of something beautiful and unprecedented. The escape itself was almost anticlimactic. Elder Thane's authority granted them access to the research vessel without question, and Kira's knowledge of Vidian technology, combined with Ethan's engineering expertise, allowed them to modify the ship's empathic resonance chambers for their unique needs as they lifted off from the moon's surface. Ethan watched through the viewport as the Vidian outpost dwindled below them. Somewhere down there, the Council was probably just discovering their absence, just beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. "Any regrets?" he asked Kiras. She settled beside him in the pilot's chair, her hand finding his with automatic ease. Her response came as a wave of pure emotion, joy, excitement, love, and underneath it all absolute certainty. Only that we waited so long to begin the ship's navigation computer, hummed to life displaying star charts that showed unexplored systems, worlds where two hearts could beat as one, without apology or explanation. As they selected their destination, a small system with 3 potentially habitable worlds, far from any established trade routes. Their bond pulsed with shared anticipation. They were leaving everything they had ever known behind, choosing love over security possibility. Over certainty, it should have been terrifying instead. As the stars wheeled around them and hyperspace beckoned, it felt like coming home. Months after their escape, Ethan and Kira had transformed a barren moon in the Kepler 442 system into something remarkable. What had begun as a desperate flight from persecution had evolved into an extraordinary experiment in interspecies cooperation and love. The settlement they had built together was unlike anything either of their civilizations had ever conceived, using Kira's bioarchitectural knowledge and Ethan's engineering skills. They had grown rather than constructed their home living structures that responded to their emotional states, healing chambers that worked for both human and Vidian physiology, and gardens where earth plants grew alongside luminescent Vidian crystals. But their greatest achievement wasn't architectural. It was the bond they had continued to develop, now free from the fear and judgment that had constrained them before. Their connection had evolved beyond even their wildest expectation, creating a hybrid consciousness that maintained their individual identities while allowing them to share experiences with unprecedented intimacy. "The probe is ready," Ethan announced one morning as he made final adjustments to their latest project, a communication device designed to reach both human and Vidian space, with a message that could change everything. Kira joined him at the workshop they had built overlooking their valley, her pregnancy now visible in the gentle curve of her luminescent skin. The child she carried was another impossibility, a hybrid being that shouldn't have been able to exist, yet grew stronger each day, its unique life force visible even to Ethan's limited empathic abilities. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, her hand resting on her belly where their daughter stirred in response to her parents' emotions. The message they had prepared was simple but revolutionary, a complete record of their bond, their escape, and most importantly, the stable, beautiful life they had built together. It was proof that love between species wasn't contamination or aberration, but transformation, a chance for both their peoples to grow beyond the limitations that fear had imposed upon them, more than that it was an invitation. Elder Thane's final transmission, received just days before, had hinted at growing unrest among younger Vidians who questioned the Council's isolationist policies. Similarly, Ethan's former colleagues in human space exploration had begun asking difficult questions about first contact protocols and the wisdom of avoiding rather than embracing alien civilizations. "The universe is changing," Ethan said, pulling Kira close and feeling their daughter respond to their united presence with what could only be described as joy. "We can either be part of that change or be left behind by it." The probe launched at sunset, its hybrid technology, carrying their message toward both homeworlds at faster than light speeds as they watched it disappear into the star-filled sky. Kira and Ethan felt a mixture of hope and trepidation that their bond amplified and balanced. 3 weeks later, the first response arrived, not from official channels but from a group of young Vidian researchers who had intercepted the transmission. Their message was brief, but profound. "You are not alone. Others dream of bridging the darkness between worlds." The second response came from an unexpected source, Captain Elena Vasquez, Ethan's former commander, whose ship had been searching for survivors of the Meridian crash. Her message was characteristically direct. "Cole, you magnificent bastard. You've started something that's got the whole exploration division talking. When can we visit?" Over the following months, their isolated moon became a nexus of activity, as representatives from both species made clandestine journeys to witness the impossible. Made real scientists, diplomats, and simple curiosity seekers came to study the hybrid settlement. But more importantly, to experience firsthand what inter-species cooperation could achieve. Not all the visitors were supportive. A Vidian Council delegation arrived with the express purpose of shutting down what they termed a dangerous experiment in genetic and cultural contamination. They found instead a thriving community where human and Vidian technologies merged seamlessly, where emotional resonance enhanced rather than threatened individual identity, and where a hybrid child played in gardens that shouldn't have been able to exist. The council leader who had originally condemned their bond stood in their home's central chamber surrounded by living walls that pulsed with the emotional harmony of the family within, and for the first time in decades allowed his mental shields to lower completely what he experienced in. That moment of openness changed everything through the ambient empathic field that Ethan and Kira had unconsciously created. Felt their love not as an external observer but as a participant, he experienced the depth of their connection, the joy of their daughter, and the profound sense of completeness that their bond provided when he raised his shields again. Tears tracked down his luminescent cheeks. "Forgive us," he said in the formal language of official apology. "We were so afraid of losing what we were that we couldn't see what we might become." The formal recognition of their bond came shortly after, accompanied by an invitation to establish the first interspecies research station with Ethan and Kira as co-directors. Similar overtures arrived from human space offering them positions in a new xenological institute dedicated to peaceful first contact protocols. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from their daughter herself, born 3 months later in Adelivery. Attended by both human and Vidian medical specialists, she emerged into the world with skin that shifted between human tones and Vidian luminescence eyes that held depths of inherited wisdom and a cry that somehow harmonized with the emotional resonance of everyone present. "She's perfect," Ethan whispered as he held her for the first time, feeling through their bond how Kira's heart soared at the sight of their child. "She's the future," Kira replied, reaching out to touch their daughter's cheek and watching as the baby's skin responded. With patterns of light that seemed to tell stories of both heritages years later, as their settlement grew into a true colony, where humans and Vidians worked and loved and built families together, Ethan would often think back to that first moment of awakening in an alien medical bay. He had expected to find death among the stars, or at best the cold isolation of scientific discovery. Instead, he had found love, not just romantic love thought, that remained the foundation of everything they had built, but something far greater. He had found the love that connected all conscious beings, the recognition that the universe was vast and strange and wonderful precisely because it brought together elements that seemed incompatible and made from them something beautiful and new. Standing on the observation deck of their research station, watching human children play with Vidian young, while their parents collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of what either species had thought possible, Ethan felt a contentment that transcended species and philosophy. He had awakened to find an alien woman leaning over him, offering not conquest or exploitation, but simply love. In accepting that gift, he had helped birth a new chapter in the story of two civilizations in the universe, vast and full of wonders yet to be discovered, stretched out before them all.